You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a pal. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. All right, team, welcome back to the Tales of Leadership podcast. I am your host, Josh McMillian, an active duty Army officer and the founder of McMillian Leadership Coaching. And I am on a mission to create a better leader, what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader or a pal. And my vision is to end toxic leadership by promoting transformational stories and skills. And I plan to do that by bringing on amazing guests. And today I have the co-authors of the Beekeeper, Pollinating Your Organization for Transformational Growth, Michael Frino and Kate Desiderio. This is a phenomenal episode because both of them have two distinct leadership stories that we kind of get into, where Michael grew up through sales and Fortune 500 companies and then pursued his doctoral degree where he met Katie. And Katie really grew up in sports, leading and becoming a collegiate soccer player, and then the captain of that team, and then taking a key leadership position, and how that kind of morphed and shaped her leadership, and how they both come together and they have strengths that are outweighed by each other's weaknesses. So they are able to cover the dead space from one another. So Michael's weaknesses happen to be Katie's strengths. And I love kind of getting into that through this episode, but then really breaking down their book, The Beekeeper. It's a phenomenal book. And it was something that was instrumental in my leadership philosophy before I even met these two. I have a B leadership philosophy, and I kind of get into that during the tail end of this episode. But as always, guys, make sure you stay at the end, and I'm going to provide you the top 3 takeaways from this episode. Let's go ahead and let on Michael and Katie. Katie, Michael, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast. How are you both doing?
Doing great.
Great.
Thanks, Josh.
Yes. So great. Thanks for having us.
So we were talking about this before, but it's always exciting to get to talk to people who have a passion about leadership, but also have like that burning desire for continued education. But it's also exciting to have two people on at the same time, because this is a first for me. I filmed like 85 podcast episodes, but I've never had the privilege and honor to get to talk to two people at once. That's pretty awesome, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for saying that, Josh. It's actually something that we'll get into in the book that is a strength of transformational leadership in thinking about how we rise together. So we'll get to that. You just planted the seed.
So I would always want to start off with maybe, Katie, you take the time, introduce yourself to the listeners. And then Michael, if you could take the time to set the stage for everyone who's going to be listening to this.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Katie Desiderio. I am a faculty member at Moravian University in their School of Business. I also run my own leadership consulting company, Proximal Development. And so, I really look to marry, the scholar practitioner work in both the university and in my consulting space.
Yeah, and I'm Michael Frino, and I've been working in organizational development now for the last 15 years, and I work in medtech, and so I run leadership development for a Fortune 500 medical device company. And Katie and I together, kind of got our doctorates together in organizational learning and leadership. That's kind of how we met. And to your point, we've kind of had a passion for ongoing learning and growth.
That is so daunting to me. And I'll tell you, like, just a point of vulnerability of I finished my master's degree in systems engineering, and I swore.
Congratulations. That's no easy feat.
Yeah, it was tough. And then now I already have that kind of desire where I want to go back and get my PhD in leadership studies, because it's something it's deeply passionate about where I want to go in life and the reason behind it. So that's awesome that you guys had that, because a lot of people don't push outside of their comfort zone and really chase that level of education. So that's amazing. And I'd love to hear, both of you have PhDs in organizational leadership. In your terms, I'm curious, how do you define leadership? And maybe is that separate even between the two of you?
So, leadership, and we always talk about this, it's really about your ability to work with and through others. And
Yeah.
so when we think about leadership, we really deconstruct leadership at the tri level, individual, group, and organizational level. And so if we're defining leadership, right, it starts with each individual. And so there's a space of turning the mirror to really
Mm.
understand yourself, right? Unapologetically and authentically, really get down to who am I? How do I show up? How do I impact people? And then, right, we could look at that effectiveness of working with and through others, because we have to first have that heightened self-awareness of ourselves to be effective as we do this important work to kind of inspire the way for others.
And Michael, you
Yeah,
same.
I would say the same, building on the tri level. I mean, I think it's really looking inward to find out, what type of leader you are and how you want to lead others, but more importantly, building, really strong teams and groups that create an environment for vulnerability and authenticity that allow people to just do their best work, and you kind of let people do what they need to do to execute at a high level. And I think that's what leadership really is, kind of how I define it.
I love that. And you're going to learn. My wife always hates when she listens to the podcast because I say I love that all the time. It's like my go-to phrase. But I see everything in the terms of leadership from my perspective of how I was raised and how I was learned is through the military. So I think of it in terms of different phases, just like battle periods of different phases. And the first phase is self-leadership, and how you guys both identified that leadership really starts with ourselves. I think that's critical. And I want to really highlight that point because it doesn't matter who's listening to this or who gets a chance to read your book that we'll get into in just a little bit. You're still a leader. You may not be leading a team or an organization, but you have to lead yourself, and you have to lead your family, and you have to lead the loved ones or your community. You're still a leader of something, but at the end of the day, you're a leader of yourself. And I think that's kind of a critical oversight that we never really focus on. We always try to focus on more of like leading organizations. So thank you for that.
So well said, Josh. And we'll wait to get to it, but we kind of thread tenets of that throughout the book. But it's also a space in a lot of the, public speaking, areas and in keynotes that we have to inspire an ability to lead from every seat. And so to your point, it's a
Yeah.
big miss, right? Societally, that people will say, like, I could lead when. You could actually start leading right now.
Yes. So that is one of the biggest things that I see, especially in the military, is that you think you have to have a certain level of rank or you have to have a certain level of title to be able to lead. And I learned this when I was going through Ranger School, is that a title and a rank doesn't mean anything. Really, it's just having the courage or being unreasonable to stand up in those moments when others won't, and stretching yourself to grow. And I think that that's the critical piece of like understanding that and then being able to take that torch and then just move forward with it. But Michael, I would love to kind of start off maybe with you of where your leadership journey really began. Like, where did you get the creative spark to become the writer that you are today?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's interesting. I've always been told I have a little creative mind, and I do like writing. I think going on my academic journey really helped kind of fuel that fire. I didn't really do anything prior, but going through my doctorate, there's a lot of reading, a lot of writing,
Yeah.
a lot of putting thoughts on paper, a lot of philosophy involved in getting your PhD, and a lot of like free thinking. And so I think that kind of sparked my interest in writing. And we'll tell the story probably a little later about how we got to the book, but storytelling is paramount in a lot of companies right now to make sure that
Yeah.
messages are getting across and that strategies are being articulated appropriately, and the art of storytelling keeps resonating out in the literature. And so storytelling became kind of a go-to for us as we wanted to get our message out. How do we effectively tell the story we want to tell in a digestible way that will allow leadership principles to get out to the masses versus a heavy academic kind of writing style?
I think that might be an interesting question to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, because communication is critical. And I've learned that as the farther you go and the more authority you gain, the larger your formation becomes or the larger your organization becomes. And to clearly communicate is pivotal to the success of the organization. And it's through storytelling. And I didn't really understand that until I had my second company command, where I had the privilege to like lead, I think, over 200 soldiers. How how do you tell a story to capture and convey the message that you're trying to move forward, but also to inspire people to take that torch and to pick up and start doing the work?
Katie, you want to grab this one?
Yeah, so I think Mike, illuminated a little bit about this, and I'll say our publisher Wiley. I want to give a shout out to them. They've been incredible in helping us kind of craft an effective fable. And so we like to remind readers and listeners that it is a fable, right? And so we had to simplify, we had to get right to the point. We had to talk about the concept and the action orientation, right, really quickly and concisely. And I think that's a hard thing for authors, right? Because you could go on, right? With, you almost lose people in the process of writing too much detail. But to really be effective in a fable, it's about the simple, transferable learnings, right? That can kind of pull people in. And Josh, you mentioned this, right? In where you kind of struggled in the transition of, overseeing your team, is as we transition, I think sometimes we get lost in the complexities of what we perceive it is. And if we simplify and think about the quick things that we could transfer immediately, right, it helps us get some of those wins and build the self-efficacy of like, wow, I'm doing a good job. People are listening, or like people are, they're hearing what I'm saying. We're making progress. And so we really kind of use that model as we, crafted the fable.
I love that. And you said one thing. So I'm an infantry guy by trade. And so if you've had any experience with the military, I always joke that I'm 1 degree away from eating crayons, right? So the infantry is a different kind of background. But there was always a concept in life that I've adopted at a very early age. And Kate, you kind of hit on it, and I call it KISS, the KISS principle. And I know we've all heard it, but keep it simple, stupid. And that philosophy in life, I always find myself going back to it, because that is the most simplest form to communicate. You don't have to get, super articulate with your words. What is the end state? And then how are we going to get to that end state with key tasks, and what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And if we can convey it. And Kate, I'd love to kind of kick over to you, because I know sports played a critical role, I think, early on in your leadership development. Where did your leadership story start?
Yeah, it was certainly on the soccer field, and really having, strong mentors that help guide me to, and it's what you're saying. It's like, find my voice. And sometimes we make assumptions about communication that people know, and we have to roll back and say, like, how are we communicating? Right. And so that started on the field. And then, right, as I went through college and became the captain of, the women's soccer team at the university, it was paramount that I was communicating, right? And it wasn't just communicating in words, but in my actions and the things that I wanted to model more for, the team to see. But then I'll say too, as a student, and Mike really touched on this, going through my academic journey, I think I put so much emphasis on, I was an athlete and I was an okay student, that I didn't really believe in myself in the classroom. But, Pygmalion effect in full force. I had college professors that were like, you're so good at public speaking. You're so good at, and I'm like, what? What are you talking about? But from a leadership perspective, when people start to believe in you, you start to see things in yourself, and then you lean in, right? You're willing to be more vulnerable. You're willing to, and so those people still play an integral role in my life. They're people that I reach out to regularly and say thank you. But they're also the ones that, I kind of moved into my second career in higher education, that from a leadership perspective, I'm like, I want to do this, right? I want to focus my whole life around this to help people just discover themselves and to kind of get out of their own way, to just, be their best.
You've had a lot of firsts, so I didn't know that you were the actual, I guess, I can't think of the term right now, for your soccer team. You're the captain of your soccer team collegiately, but you are also one of the first, I think, the role that you switched over into in your board or your business department.
Yeah.
I can't think of the term right
So
now.
I was the first female chair of the, economics and business department, which was something that from a leadership perspective, Mike and I talk about this all the time. He is, he has daughters. I have daughters, right? When we're thinking about developing, young leaders too, there was a space for me as like the first female chair at the sixth oldest college in America, right? Was I really had to kind of tee it up, right? That other women can follow, and that we can kind of help each other in that space of leadership development in an ongoing way.
So you guys both go get your PhDs. Are you going through that process together? When did you link up?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We both went to the same university. I was on a one campus. She was on another, so we were kind of doing it together at the same time, just in different locations. Ironically, we were just talking about this story not too long ago, but we graduated from our PhD program. We only knew each other as
like this,
like this
on a camera.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it was like 6 years later, I think, that we wrote our first paper and got together after that, where we met for the first time in person and decided to go to a conference and put a paper out there. And that was kind of our first dipping our toe into the writing journey together. So, ironically, went to school together, but we really didn't get to meet each other in person for 6 years after.
That's really hard, I think, to establish like a level of rapport and trust. And maybe that would be very interesting to kind of get into for a second before we get to the book. Because when I graduated from my systems engineering degree, I left the infantry and I switched into acquisitions, which is a functional area in the Army. And my first leadership role was managing a team of highly educated, and I'm saying highly educated civilians, brilliant minds, from a virtual perspective, because COVID happened. And to me, like that was daunting. That was like one of the biggest fears that I've ever went into a role. How did you guys, establish trust? I think not being able to work directly together, but collaborating through virtual means.
So simply like communication, right? I mean, it's like being able to, call one another and say, I just sent you a paper. Can you review it? Right. What are you trying to establish? Right. And the constant kind of open lines of, well, I disagree with this, or why did you say, or why are we doing it like that? Or why are we, and then it gets more to like the personal level. And we touch on this a little bit in the book when the bee goes behind the scenes of like just the different, interpretations of employees, right? With Catherine, the protagonist's messages back to her company is we have these deep level diversity differences among us, right? Mike and I couldn't be more different in how we look at the world and how we, right, interact and, right, our personality and behavioral attributes. But it's even identifying those and giving ourselves that space to be ourselves, right? And kind of look at like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of it like that. But I think communication becomes a key there in trust building. Mike, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think that we talked earlier about kind of looking inward, about kind of the lenses you're seeing the world through and understanding kind of your leadership style. And I think that's a big part of it, right? If you don't have that kind of understanding of who you are, what's important to you, your core value system, but more importantly, understand the people in your life's core value system, I think it becomes much easier to have those kind of relationships long distance, because compromising someone's values or doing something that upsets them becomes kind of the inhibitor of growth, in our opinion. And I think that's kind of the foundational.
Yeah, such a good point.
All right, team, let's take a quick break from this podcast. And I want to personally invite you to our private Facebook community that I call Purposeful Accountable Leaders, or PALS. And PALS is a community dedicated to inspiring and developing servant leaders by sharing transformational stories and skills, exactly what Tales of Leadership is all about. My goal is to build a community of like-minded leaders that can share lessons learned, ask questions, and celebrate wins when it happens. And my mission in life is clear. I will end toxic leadership by sharing transformational stories and skills, and you will find countless transformational leaders in this group. Many of them I have had the honor to serve with in the military. If you want to find a community that can help you grow both personally and professionally, we would love to have you. You can simply search Purposeful Accountable Leaders on Facebook or click the Leadership Resources tab in the show notes to join. I am looking forward to seeing you guys and continuing to grow together on our leadership journey. Back to the podcast. Yeah, that is critical. That last piece there, the core values, because it doesn't matter how we communicate, because we're still going to be able to convey our message, but it's that trust, the glue that I think holds organizations together is core values, that the integrity of knowing that if I ask you to do something, Kate, that you're going to do it. And I never have to second guess myself when I do ask, because I have faith in you. You have a high degree of integrity. You have a high character. And then that is critical. That was a great point. And another thing you said, I think, Kate, you brought it up in terms of communication, of having healthy candor. You guys weren't afraid to banter back and forth on something when you're collaborating on a document. And that's hard to do, especially I think in a more virtual world, because there's a level of like, hey, you're attacking my writing. You can't be face to face, and you can't pick up on all those different emotional cues that you have. But all phenomenal points. And as you guys were going through your PhD program in organizational leadership, what were some of the research kind of building blocks that you were learning that made transformational leaders and then helped build transformational cultures?
Katie, you want to take that first?
Yeah. So at first, Josh, I want to say, as a prelude to the learnings in our doctoral program, you touched on, being able to communicate with candor. And then, something that Mike and I often say in an acronym is DWYSYWD, which is do what you say you will do. Right. So there's a space of just like, accountability in how we communicate, but we'll like just throw the acronym, right, as DWYSYWD. And we hold each other to it. Right. And so in that space of, I think this threads from, right, our doctoral program is, in relationship building, when we look at the tri-level of leadership, you have to first know yourself. You have to know how you show up. You have to know your impact on others. And so, from there, that stems into then how I communicate with Mike. But more importantly than that, how does Mike interpret my message? And so intention and impact are different. And so my intentions could be, Mike, I want to help you. I'm going to say this. Mike's impact, right, of my message could be like, I can't believe she just said that. Right. And so there has to be alignment there to make sure on my end, right, of what I intended, right, that I'm making it right, in impact. And I think so in a lot of the learnings, like fundamentally, we're almost, we're growth partners, but we're also accountability partners to say, like, we can't be a fraud. Like if we're telling people these are important, like tenets of, leadership, we need to model these. And the hardest space to do it is like interpersonally, right? When you're put to the test to say, oh, wow, when I'm stressed, it's easy for me to revert back to what's easy or what comes natural. Right. But in heightened awareness, we have to be able to adjust, right, to flex, to meet people where they are, and to have that social awareness to make it right.
That is one of the most critical things that I've learned that tells the true character of someone. You can say all the right things. And I had a battalion commander say this, and I've told the story many times, but it basically sums up to deeds, not words. You can say everything on paper, but when the moment comes, is your actions going to align with what you said you're going to do? And are you actually going to model the way? And I love how you say that, is that because you set the standard within the organization, your family, whatever, your team, by the actions and then your words, and they have to match, they have to align. And that's an absolutely beautiful point. Another question that kind of popped in my mind is you guys have a very heavy focus on educational leadership, kind of like the science behind it. Did you learn anything as you were going through different jobs outside of an academic background about leadership that you didn't learn when you were going through your different masters and your doctoral programs?
I think it's interesting as we were kind of listening to the conversation about, actions and words and kind of going through the educational leadership piece. So when I graduated college, I started off in sales. I was a sales guy. I was banging on doors, selling benefits, human resources, payroll, service, and, pharmaceuticals, all that stuff, and so my personality is one that was like execution mode, right? And I think what I learned a lot in the doctoral program shifted my personality significantly, right? I was always a very high on the DISC map, a D. And over the years, after getting my doctorate and learning to kind of be more questioning and skeptical, and philosophically, that's what they teach you to do. Like ask questions, ask more questions, challenge, like think different. And And I become a little more questioning and skeptical by nature, I think, through that program. And so I do ask questions as to why we're doing something. We're trying to get to the root of the why something is what it is. And so I learned a ton that way. And I think that does have applications in business and when we're thinking about leadership, whether it's the military or not, because you mentioned earlier, Josh, but understanding the why someone is doing something or
Yeah.
why somebody wants you to do something is really important. And I don't think we can effectively understand the why unless we're really asking questions, seeking to understand, ourselves, but two, whether it's the organization or your leader, they create the environment for that to happen. And if you can't ask questions and it's frowned upon, a lot of people can't get to that why, and then it's harder for them to build trust, align, and feel empowered to do the rest work.
There's a quote by General MacArthur, and I can't find it, and I can't remember it right now, but he basically talked about the art of leadership is distilling down what is facts and intelligence. Like when you get an intelligence briefing, 95% of that is not a fact. And being able to distill down to what are actual facts. So that story kind of just reminded me of that. And I'd love now kind of like just to transition into you met each other, you started working. What inspired you to start the book, The Beekeeper? And then where did the title come from too? Because I love that title.
So Mike and I had been writing academic journals for over a decade. And at the university, I was going up for a promotion to full professor. And
Oh,
part of
wow.
that full professorship is to write a book, right? And so I had
Mm.
been, writing over time. Mike and I kind of got comfortable in the space of writing in, academic journal space, really thinking about performance improvement and, the scholar practitioner use. And so I came to Mike and said, like, what do you think about writing a book? And as we first started to think about the book, we started to really think about it in the way that we had always written. And so we wrote out like kind of traditional table of contents, a traditional, leadership concepts that we wanted to weave in. And it actually took some conversations with other publishers, and actually write some like, no, we won't accept your work, from publishers to say like, that's not a fit. Until Mike and I were actually traveling for business. And so Mike lives in Florida, I'm in Pennsylvania, and we were both in Chicago for different reasons, about 30 miles away from each other. And we are like, well, we have to meet for dinner, right? Let's talk about this book, about what it could look like. And so we sat down for Chicago pizza. And Josh, we still have the pizza box where we mapped out on the back of the pizza box. Like we started drawing like flowers
Crazy.
and bees, right? But Mike actually, in his creative mind, was like, Katie, we're talking about growth, right? And everything about transformation in leadership is about growth. Like, what if we wrote about bees? And in my
Mm.
consulting space, we were talking about how storytelling was really resonating, like post-pandemic, specifically with people and people's discovery of themselves, of how they were thinking about growth mindset, how they were moving out of their comfort zones. And so we kind of got on this topic of like talking about bees and pollination, and what if we wrote a fable, that was really a story. And we had a blast, like kind of thinking about what this, the imagination of it could be. So we leave Chicago, and 18 days later, Mike sends me a text message that it's UN World Bee Day. And he's like, Katie, like the universe moment, right? Like, I think this literally was meant to be, pun intended.
Yeah.
And so we were like, let's put the pitch deck together, and, let's start to, get buy-in. And so the Beekeeper title came in as we were writing. Each of the chapters are what we call bee mindsets. And so from the individual level of leadership, you get to choose who and how you want to be. And so similar to a beekeeper overseeing his or her hive, right? You'll see that the second E in bee is dotted because that kind of falls off at the end of the story, right? And we're asking leaders to become beekeepers, BE. You get to choose who and how you want to be as a leader. And so we made that akin to, the lives of bees.
It's funny. I think it's destiny that you guys ended on this podcast, because at the end of this, I always do a final show segment that I call the Killer Bees.
Oh, that's
So
fine.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
we're gonna get to it, but kind of, I don't want you to share everything about the book because I understand that people need to go get that.
Okay.
But what can you share from the book in terms of the B principles?
I think one of the themes that is most important for the book is the art of being proximal. It's really kind of the
Mm,
foundation of our book. And so, Katie and I talk about the word proximal and what it means, but it really means center and closest to the heart, right? And when we think about that in medical terms, that's kind of how it's defined. And so what we encourage through the story is really people to identify, how they're going to be proximal, how they can inspire people to be proximal. And through all those chapters, Josh, as you mentioned, there's lessons and there's stories
yeah.
that Catherine, the protagonist, went through, ultimately identifying how she is going to place herself at the center of her organization's growth and how she focused on her own personal individual growth.
One of my favorite quotes from there is the beekeeper is responsible for all the bees, their growth, and their ability to do their jobs that they were placed there to do. And I love how you were able to correlate stories around bees and then tie it into being a leader. To me, you guys are blowing my mind. Because I'm not that type of or I'm not that creative in order to do that. But walk me through the book as much as you want to share in terms of the narrative of how you convey the message of transformational leadership.
Yeah, so I'll touch on it, and I know Mike will have a lot to add too. Is there's a I think there's a place for Mike and I in that space of vulnerability that we had never written in this way. And so, Josh, like, talk about move yourself out of your comfort zone.
Mm,
Talk about like being a subject matter expert, but really not being a subject matter expert when it comes to first writing a book, let alone a fable. And so,
yeah.
what we decided to do was literally put on bee suits and go meet with beekeepers and learn what happens at a hive. And so, we were like, if we're in, we're all in, right? And we're
You're
researchers at the
modeling the way.
core. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we are researchers at the core. And so research always for us was in the traditional sense, right? Of looking at academic, seminal works and kind of building on theory and the way that we can apply this. And this really took a, hands-on, let's get out there and see what these applications are. And so we had a lot of fun kind of learning about bees and beekeeping, and the lessons, the leadership lessons, as you read in the book, are astounding. And I think in so many ways, we had so much fun with it because there were so many natural threads, right,
Yeah.
of learning, that I felt like we could have made it much longer, right? But our publishers are like, nope, fables are a short, quick, concise message that, made people want to take action.
We go back to that model of KISS. We got to keep it simple, stupid.
That's right.
Not from that mindset of being clear and concise. So I think some of the more impactful principles when I was scanning through your book is be transformational, be curious, and be growth minded. Those really resonate with me because there's a concept that I have throughout like my leadership philosophy, and I call it the 3 C's: be coachable, curious, and committed. And I think those all are tied together. It's like we always have to be committed to whatever we're doing. We have to be 100% in, and we need to be coachable. We need to understand that we don't have all the right answers, but we need to be able to listen and observe and understand our surroundings. But the most important one is being curious. If we don't have a curious mind and a spirit, we're never going to be able to put ourselves in those abilities or those situations that kind of stretch ourselves. Those three really stuck out to me, and I would love maybe if you could kind of expand upon those.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many. And I just want to reiterate for you and the listeners that, we chose, 15 or so B mindsets for our book, but, they're really unlimited, right? These mindsets are how you want to be, how you want to lead. But I loved how you pulled out be curious, because I think that really is the impetus of leadership and
Yeah.
self-discovery and growth, right? If you are curious about others, if you are curious about, individuals, human beings, if you're curious about what's going on in their world, I think you learn a ton. It's very easy to kind of tune out and just kind of be in your own space and own world. But when you demonstrate curiosity, I think, exponential growth happens. And
Yeah.
the growth minded piece really goes back to kind of really the fixed versus growth mindset, work that's been published in the literature by Dweck. And it's like, it's very simple to like say, no, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to be. It just is what it is, versus kind of taking a step back saying, no, I have an opportunity here to be curious, to learn, to, get out of my own way and really kind of look inward to say, where do I need to grow? But I don't think any of that happens if you don't have a growth partner that can help you. I think it's very hard to do as an individual if you don't have someone challenging you, someone that can help you see your blind spots, that someone can illuminate things that you may not be seeing. And so, Katie and I have talked about it, but we're very different individuals on kind of
Yeah.
the DISC personality map, but we create a space where, she can challenge respectfully, I can challenge respectfully, and kind of come to agreement. That's where growth occurs. And I think one of the
Yeah.
leaders in my life who said it the best was, if you throw yourself in the deep end of a pool, that's where you want to live all the time. Not in the low end, right? Because the low end, you're probably tanning and having a margarita, versus in the deep end, you're treading water, and that's where growth happens, right? And so we always try to put ourselves in the deep end, so we can continue to tread water and get better.
There was something you said right there, and I've kind of harped on that throughout some of the blogs that I've written, and I learned it through the metaphor of the military. You talk about blind spots. Well, in the military, there's a concept it's called dead space. So when we're doing a military operation, an offensive operation or a defensive operation, we always have terrain that we can't clearly see. We can't shape it with direct fire weapon systems or indirect fire weapon systems. We can't patrol that area because maybe it's too densely vegetated. Those are invisible to us. And the same is true in leadership, is that we have natural blind spots within our own peripheral vision that we don't understand. But when we surround ourselves, and I love how you talked about being in the deep pool, when we throw ourselves into the deep pool, we jump off that 10-meter tower, and we surround ourselves with people who cover our blind spots because their strengths are our weaknesses, we have that multiplying effect. And there was a story, I think Edmund Chung brought it up. It's a really good one, about if you have a horse carrying a buggy, it can pull 4,000 pounds. And if you had two horses carrying a buggy, well, in theory, you would think that they could carry 8,000 pounds, but really they could carry up to 12,000 pounds because there's a multiplying effect. And the same is true when you surround yourself with someone like Katie, because Katie, I see our personality is probably very similar. And I need someone like Michael in my life to keep me accountable. And I always talk about accountability for me as an accountability tree, someone that's deeply rooted, that can help me when times get tough, but also hold me to the standard and unwavering in their resolve. I love that, man. That was some really great nuggets. Talking through the book, what are some of your favorite parts, I guess, for each one of you? What is your one favorite part in the entire book, the favorite part of the story?
I actually love the piece, in the beginning when Catherine's children come to her and pitch like going to the farm, and she's like, I need a spa vacation, because there's a moment there, and readers might not catch it, right, where she doesn't want to go on this vacation. And so I love that piece in the book, because so often as leaders, we're put in situations where we already decide something's going to be terrible before we experience it, right? We already made a decision like that's going to be awful. And we fail to show up curious, to show up present, to show up growth minded. But she shows up, right? And a lot changes when she meets Henry. And so, I just think that's it's a real kind of learner's moment, I think, in the book, that if we're present, right, and we're able to kind of be present in where we are, I think great things can happen.
Every time my wife wants to go do a social event, I always hunt the bad stuff. It's like, I don't want to go do that. So, what about you, Michael?
I think for me, I think towards the end, where we kind of get a peek behind the curtain, at the organization, kind of the be on the walls perspective, that was probably the most fun chapter, to write through, because you're kind of exploring all the ways people can interpret things, all the ways people can interpret messages. and allowing people to really kind of come to their own realization of, what those messages mean. But I think more importantly, that chapter demonstrates that it takes courage for someone to stand up and go against kind of the status quo of how
Mm.
people are feeling, and create kind of a viral moment where, that first person to do something creates followership, and that those followers can then kind of really create momentum. And I do believe that was kind of one of the more fun chapters to write, and I think provides a lot of perspective
And
to
Mike, I love
readers.
that you brought this up because it really is a demonstration, right? He's talking about the leadership guide to a thriving hive. And so in full transparency and vulnerability, our editors came back to us. Like Mike and I had just done like editing, like nights, weekends, right? Like we work full-time jobs. So this is like you're adding it on to like, late nights, right? Of doing these editorial
Mm.
updates. And they come back and they're like, we need another chapter. We were like, what? What do you mean? And we're in this KISS mindset now, right? Where we're like, it's concise, like we got the message, so then we were thinking about the readers. We're like, if we add something, it has to be meaningful and it has to be something. And it ended up to be, to Mike's point, it's so much fun writing it, but it ended up to be a piece that for readers was like, without it, we couldn't imagine now the Vaba without it, right? Because it makes such a profound impact of that bee going behind the scenes.
All right, team, let's take a quick break from this episode. And I want to share a leadership resource with you, and that is the Resiliency Based Leadership Program. RBLP's vision is to create a worldwide community of practice committed to building and leading resilient teams. So, why do you need to build and lead a resilient team? Resilient teams are the key to individual and organizational growth, regardless of being in the military or in the civilian workforce. Building collective teams allows for exponential growth and the team's ability to overcome adversity, adapt, and most importantly, grow. And then, bottom line up front, resilient teams are just stronger together. And here's a fact: 99% of the people who take that course recommend it to others. And I'm one of them. I just completed my certification and I highly recommend this. And the great news is it's most likely free to you. And if you're in the military, it is 100% free to you. And if you want to learn more, you can look in the show notes for this episode and find the link and use the discount code JMCMILLION. And that is also in the show notes. Back to the episode. You brought up a great point, and I think that's really important. And this is outside the topic of the book, but you both have full-time jobs, and
Yeah.
you wrote a book anyway.
Yeah.
That I understand the level of sacrifice that has to be made, but walk me through that. How do you do that? How do you manage your time to be so productive?
Yeah. So I think, so both of us have an innate drive, right? Like we're
Yeah.
both self-directed. To Mike's point, we love the deep end. Like we need the like mind nourishment, that
Mm.
like the mental stimulation, the learning, like it's both ingrained, I think, in both of us. So that's something that always aligns in the work that we do together, that we know that there's never a question of showing up to do it. But that the virtual space, and this is where Mike and I were comfortable, because remember, we started our academic journey in a virtual space with shared documents, meeting over Zoom, like talking on the
Yeah.
phone. And so we just used like, really the strengths of what we had done right over a decade ago that started the journey to say, let's think about who's taking what, and we can, pass things off for edits, review, additions. And it was, just as you opened, constant communication, right? Making sure that there was alignment. And then just the commitment of whenever we could fit it in, right? We both have really crazy schedules, crazy jobs, travel, children. And so we had to give each other grace in the space of, whenever you
Mm.
could do it, we trust that we'll get it back to the other.
I think part of what made it so efficient and effective was like that level of trust, like you said. Like, we were able to challenge respectfully, give feedback, pivot, make changes, and not have hurt feelings about it, right? Or not say someone is like implicating your writing or doesn't like the way you're writing, because we really know that about each other, right? And if Katie says this is probably a good way forward, then I'm saying, all right, let's do it, right? I'm not, we'll collaborate, but there's an element of a trust there that kind of moves things forward quicker.
So I know we were talking about this, before we started filming the podcast episode, but it's funny, again, in a small world, the two correlations to bees. One is I have my own bee leadership philosophy, and I really developed that through all the different leaders that I wanted to emulate when I was growing up as a young officer in the military. Be present, be a problem solver, be positive, be a team player, be humble, be brilliant, and then be gone. So those were kind of like my B leadership philosophies that I would always have as part of like my doc of like whenever I was taking over an organization, these were my B principles. And it's interesting that some of those correlate, I think, directly to the book that you guys written, but I love how you were able still to tease out that story of the beekeeper and correlate that to leadership, because that's such a beautiful metaphor. Again, going back to the theme of really this episode of being able to clearly communicate a story to inspire other people to be, pun intended,
Yeah.
their best. And I think, Michael, you talked about this too, is that the B principles that are in this book, there's so many more that you can kind of elaborate on. So understanding like how you want to lead yourself and lead others. What are your B principles that you want to have? Um, I guess, is there another book that you guys wanted to write? Because there's all these other B principles that you could expand upon.
Well, I think it's interesting. We by design kind of came up with the leadership fables kind of website, and kind of that's kind of our mantra. So we definitely want to continue to write, and we'll definitely have other thoughts. Look, the B mindsets and B statements, to your point, I mean, those aren't unique to this book, right? They've been on leadership stuff for many years. I think what the book does is really focuses on looking at it through the lens of someone who is struggling to build culture at work. They're feeling the growing pains of a company, and the beekeeper, somebody that they are curious to talk to, helps them illuminate maybe some ways forward, unintended, and through the lessons that we give on how beekeepers create thriving hives. I think that is kind of the impetus for the book. And we have a lot of people that have talked to us, and we're super humbled, that give us the same feedback. Like it's really awesome how you pulled it together. It's a very inspiring story, and it means a lot to us. And we're using it in our organization, our school, or whatever it may be, because the storytelling aspect of it, like we told the story through that lens, and I think people are grasping onto it. So yes, more books in the future, and so we'll see what those look like.
Congratulations, because this is already a Wall Street Journal bestseller, right? That's amazing. That's not a small achievement. So first book that you guys collaborated on is already a bestseller. No, there's no pressure putting
Yeah.
out, right?
Thank you. It's incredibly humbling. And to Mike's point, like, yes, we're talking about book 2, and we're excited about that. But Josh, I need to roll back for a minute, because you unceremoniously shared with us that you have these B principles in your leadership philosophy, and then kind of segued right into, Mike. So, universe moment, I think, to your point, we were meant to connect and work together. And who knows if there's ways that we could work together beyond just connecting here on the podcast. This is like the work that's meaningful to Mike and I. It's about just connecting with other people, and we say pollinators now, that just are out to make the world and people better. And so, in this commitment, I got the chills when you were sharing your leadership philosophy, because this is really what it's all about, right? How do we just connect with people who want to just do good and help people be better, and help the world around us grow? So it's really great just to be here and connect with you.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for that. Man, that means a lot. I put a lot of time and kind of effort in understanding who I am. And it took me a long time to kind of realize that, because I had to go through a coaching program and really like distill down the facts, of have some deep self-reflection,
That's
and then
not easy.
take some, it's not,
That's not
especially
easy.
when you come from a combat arms alpha
Yeah.
led world. I guess the best way to think of it is like, when you do positive affirmations, you journal, you do those things. Everyone would always say those are foo-foo things. We don't do that. We act. We keep going forward. But in order to grow, we have to stop. And stop means silence your mind, take a tactical pause, observe your surroundings, and then pursue with purpose. And it took me a long time to have that level of maturity, but kind of getting back to you guys and this book, where can people find this book if they want to buy a copy today?
So it's out there on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all retailers. If you want to support local independent bookstores, generally they can order it for you as well. It's on our website, Leadership Fable. So there's a lot of places you can, pick the book up, and so just wherever books are sold, really.
Kate, you answered one of my questions, and this is going to be one of the last ones that I was going to ask. But can you kind of share your why you're still pushing each day to grow, to master your craft of being a leader and trying to make a positive impact on this world? And go ahead.
Yeah. And so I think I did say it probably with a lot of passion when
you beautifully summed it up.
When what you said resonated. It really is about, helping, people around us grow, helping people imagine, their best selves. And in a lot of ways, that space of discovery is ongoing. Mike and I are modeling that as we're not only wrote the book, but now the book's out there. And now what do we do with it? Right. And so how do we model this like ongoing learning and growth? It never ends. And how do we just rally people around us to come on the journey with us? Right. The why is like, we're brighter, better, richer, stronger together. And so like, let's just surround ourselves with amazing pollinators, right? To just help people in the world grow.
It's funny you say model the way always resonates with me. But me producing this podcast in a way, and I think you guys writing that book, you put it out there in the world, and now there's that pressure of like, hey, you have to literally model the way. It's words and deeds aligned. And I'm always talking about leadership, but I still lead and run teams. And I always have that sense of, maybe imposter syndrome of like, who am I to still talk about leadership? But I always have to kind of break through that mindset and kind of understand, I do have what it takes. I have a curious mind, and I can continue to go forward and make a positive impact and be unreasonable. Michael, kind of go back to one of your terms that you say, and have that courage to continue to move forward. It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. What do you believe separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader?
I think it goes back to what we've been talking about, over the course of the last, 50 minutes. And that is that space of, vulnerability and curiosity. And, you mentioned it, Josh, in one of your B tenets of being coachable. Right? We have to be able to listen to understand. We have to show up to say, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Right? And be able to look around and listen and learn, regardless of how long we've been leading or who we're leading.
Oh, I love that.
And just for me on that, I think really good leaders they can be present. They can demonstrate being present for their team, available when they need them. But the really exceptional leaders or extraordinary leaders, I think, are vulnerable, and they're they create an environment where they themselves let their guard down and allow other people to do that as well. You can be present in an environment, but really not vulnerable, and I think those are 2 differentiators.
I'm breaking one of my rules of being brief, but I'm in the process of right now of reading several books, and I always put the books on the back that I'm reading, but vulnerability is one of the core characteristics that I want to learn and grow more in, because where I was raised in my leadership journey, vulnerability was a weakness. And when we do not portray that, but what I've learned is the greatest leaders that I've ever had were vulnerable, and there is a way to do that. Okay, I'll shut up. Second question. So, and I think I know what this one's going to be. If you could provide one resource to our listeners to grow their leadership, what would it be? Pun intended.
So we of course want to say the Beekeeper, right? Yeah. But we want to take that further, and we want to invite listeners and readers to become members of the Hive at leadershipfables.com. We have free resources on there that we call growth guides, and that's really the space that like we don't end with the book. right? Continue to put this into action, right? Pollinate, share the learnings with others, challenge people, have discussions, learn yourself. We talk a lot about, unlearning. And I think as adults, it's harder for us to unlearn, right, than it is to learn. And so in that resource, right, read the book, but then also, right, go on, become a member of the Hive and use the growth guides.
And accountability. I love how that models the way, right? Like read the book, understand. In the military, we have a concept: crawl, walk, run. Crawl, hey, read the book. Walk, start to model the way. Run, join the group, be accountable,
Yeah,
and continue to make a
I
positive
love
change. And
that.
all those will be in the notes. So
Can we
I'll
use
make sure
that?
that,
Can we use that, Josh?
yeah,
That's awesome.
100%. Yeah, 100%. All right. So next question. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be and why? And it really kind of house to both of you guys.
I think if I were to reflect back and give myself some advice, I would say, be curious earlier, right? I think sometimes it takes a while to get out of your shell and kind of identify, what your natural, skill sets are. And I think curiosity kind of helps with that.
Yeah, mine would definitely be vulnerability. I had a perception early on that if you're the leader, you should have all the answers. If you're the leader, you should know everything. If you're the leader, and I think that's where imposter syndrome could creep in, right? But we teach now, how do we transfer imposter syndrome to confident humility? And so in my mature self now, it's about like, well, that's a great question. I hadn't considered it before, right? Tell me more about it. And so I think there's a space of just allowing yourself, to embrace ongoing learning and growth, regardless of how many degrees you have, right? What your experience is, it doesn't matter.
Confident humility. I love that. And I see that in the military, especially with a lot of general officers. Doesn't matter the title that they make, they always have that level of humility about them. And the same is true, I think, in the academic world with all the different certifications or degrees that you could obtain. You still have that level of curiosity and humility about you. All right, final question. How can our listeners find you? And then how can they add value to your mission? I know we've already went through some of those ways.
Yeah, I think so. Our website, we've mentioned a couple times, Leadership Fables. We are, to Katie's point earlier, we're learners here. We're not book marketers. So we're trying to create some social media, Instagrams, Facebook. So we just encourage people to follow us and share, and we're doing our best to put content out. But all that stuff that helps things go viral are really important, and we need kind of our army of people to kind of support us, and as we get out there and help us, go even more viral, and get the word out about how you can become a pollinator. We want to get the message out to as many people as possible.
Katie, Michael, this has been an amazing podcast. And to be vulnerable, because that was one of the themes of this one. I was a little nervous of how this was going to go with having two people on at the same time, but this was a fire episode. You dropped so many nuggets, and I'm really looking forward to reading this book and learning and maybe even helping collaborate in the future with you guys. Thank you for everything that you do. And I look forward to seeing the growth. All right, team, it is time for our after action review. What are the top 3 takeaways you should have from this episode? The first one that I wrote down was communication. And one of the key acronyms that I used was KISS: keep it simple, stupid. That is something that I've learned throughout my life is the more detailed you are, often the deeper you go into things, the more questions and the more resistance you're going to meet. It is best to be able to clearly communicate and articulate what you need in the simplest of terms, because then you are not burdening your team to all these unspecified tasks. When you are clear with your language, it gives your team the latitude to really control their destiny of how they're going to get to that end state. It begins to build momentum. And after you get a win after a win after a win, then we have that compounding effect. So the first key takeaway is in life, in leadership, keep it simple, stupid. Don't get so far into the weeds that you lose yourself. Remember, communicate clearly, be concise, words matter. Number 2, key takeaway is confident humility. That was something that I loved, and it was towards the tail end of this episode. And That is a theme that I've seen throughout this entire leadership journey, is that great leaders are humble, but they're also confident. And that is a hard balance to strive. When you see someone who is a CEO that does not have humility, but they're confident, well, that's because they have too big of an ego. And the whole goal of a servant leader, of a transformational leader, what I'm trying to promote is to check your ego at the door. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter how much authority. It doesn't matter what your degrees are. It doesn't matter what you've done. It only matters what you do right now. And always remember, you are not here for yourself. You are here for other people. And when you are in a leadership role, it is not for you, it is for other people. And if you're not willing to make that level of sacrifice and have that level of humility, then you should not be a leader. But you also have to be confident. Then you need to understand the rule of 3 C's: be committed, coachable, and curious. But understanding that you are not the smartest person. And if you can have that level of healthy, confident humility, you are going to excel, because most of the leaders, that at least that I've seen, don't have that balance. And if you can learn to maintain that balance, it's going to be critical. The last takeaway is really up to you. What is your B philosophies? When we talked about several in this episode, we talked about be transformational, be curious, be growth minded. And then I went through and I shared my B leadership philosophy: be present, be a problem solver, be positive, be a team player, be humble, be brilliant, be gone. Those are mine. What are yours? What are the B principles in your life that are going to make you a better leader, that are going to allow you to communicate clearly and articulate, and are going to allow the organization, your team, your family to start gaining wins and gaining momentum and being able to crush through any type of obstacle that you face? All right, team. Hey, if this podcast and this episode has brought you value, do me a favor. Make sure you share this podcast with someone who is a leader of themselves, their family. It doesn't matter. Share this podcast. It would help me out tremendously. Give it a 5-star review, no matter on what platform you're listening. However you can leave a review, it would mean the world. And then support. You can go to Tells of Leadership /Buzzsprout, and you can support the podcast. That way I can continue to bring quality content and help you guys grow your leadership. And then also go to McMillian Leadership Coaching. Follow me on social media, especially on Instagram and LinkedIn, and check out some of the free leadership resources I have in terms of the blogs that I have on my website. As always, team, I'm Josh McMillian, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.